Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Uncommon Comedy Podcast. I am your host, Brian Apprille, and you can follow us on Facebook at Uncommon Comedy. You can follow us on Instagram at Uncommon Comedy Tour and YouTube at Uncommon Comedy Podcast. We're going to get right into it today because today's guest is just another legend in the comedy world. If you're a comedian, you should know who this man is. If you're not a comedian, you should know who this man is because he's been on everything. His list of credits is just, Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, Late Night with David Letterman, Tonight Show with Jay Leno. He was a regular on Married with Children. He's been in Roxanne. He's written several books, including I Killed, Kicking Through the Ashes, Kicking Through the Ashes, My Life as a Stand-Up Comedian. He also was part of another book called I Killed, which is a great read. You're going to learn a lot today, and I'm super, super excited to have our guest come in. So please, ladies and gentlemen, welcome the one, the only Mr. Ritch Shydner. Rich, how are you, sir?
Hey, good, Brian. Good to see you.
Yeah, good to have you, man. So thank you again for taking time today. It's interesting with this. I always like to start off talking about a little bit of how my guest comedy has impacted me and what I really appreciate. What I appreciate about it, and your story is a little different with me. I learned of your comedy through a show that I did that my former manager Mark Anderson had put together, and you had written some material that was used in the show. And so for my first exposure to your material was me actually saying your material in like a play, and I just remember thinking like, wow, this is so good. And then I get to finally work with you and just see you work on stage and just see the brilliance of your writing and your stage presence and how you can go into the crowd if you want, your storytelling. It's just amazing. And I absolutely love your work and I really appreciate your style. So
thanks, Brian. And, Mark Anderson, I mean, how much I miss that guy. I love that guy. I got a picture up on a wall back there in my office. You can't see it.
Okay,
he's up there, my wall of past friends, and he just was a great guy. I just really loved that guy.
Yeah, he was a super nice guy and just had a good heart and just wanted to give to people. And
very unusual in this business, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So let's dive into a little bit about you. I mean, you've done everything, you've been everywhere. What got you inspired, or what got you started into stand-up?
I was in law school. In fact, I just was writing a little bit about that because a friend of mine from law school passed. I was in law school, and I was always being funny, making people in class laugh and cracking jokes. And a guy named Howard Vine, another classmate, he thought I was funny. I thought I was funny, so we needed a third opinion. So he found a place to take me in January 1977. It was a coffee house a couple of blocks from the hotel that I was living and working in. And it was in the basement of a church. It was called Iguana Coffee House. And I went down there to do stand-up for the first time. I don't think I was saying I'm going to go do stand-up. I was just going to go do comedy, perform by myself in front of these people. And it was every bit of a disaster as you can imagine. I could have memorized the material. As soon as I got up there, I forgot what I memorized. I managed to strangle out one joke that got one person go like that reaction where one person starts to laugh and no one follows and they just quit. They go, oh, I'm sorry, that was not good. You're right. And that's all I got. But it was enough, because you're going from, and every stand-up comic has to make that transition from making your friends laugh in the moment to making strangers laugh on command. And I got some sort of reaction from a stranger first time. The person didn't know who I was, and I knew enough instinctively to think that was a big deal. And so I kept going back. I just went after it after that. I just went after it.
I found that interesting because you always get those people who go, oh, my friends say I'm funny. My friends say I'm funny. They always come up to me. I'm sure they come up to you. And is that basically what advice do you kind of say? Like, hey,
Well, you got to start there. But I've seen people come into comedy and I watch them and I go, whoever laughed with you. I mean, I can see people laughing at you, but whoever laughed with you. I mean, but you have to start there. And then whether you have the drive to overcome all the failures in the beginning, that's a whole nother matter. And that's what separates I think, a stand-up from just a funny person. I know people who are funnier than 90% of the stand-up comedians. I can name them right now, right off the top of my head. A man named Cam Melchiori. He's a lawyer in Baltimore. I went to college with him. He's funnier than most professional comedians. Never had the desire or drive or need to get up in front of the strangers and make them laugh, for stand-up comedy. So it's a whole different thing, that separation.
Yeah, absolutely. And you said you went up and got like one sliver of a laugh, and that's enough to just kind of keep you going. It's really hard. And I always found this interesting about stand-up is like the only or one of the few art forms where you have to practice the same way you perform, in front of a live audience. There's no like a guitar you can play at home in in your room and get good at it, but stand-up, it's like you have to be out there, live, bullets flying type of thing. And
there's no laughter, there's no stand-up show. That's what's so funny about these Zoom room stand-up shows. I mean, if there's no laughter, there's no stand-up show. In fact, I see no reason why to do it. The only reason I did it was the laughter. I wanted to hear that laughter, that music, and then the more you do it, you go, I want more of it. I was a total junkie. More, louder, bigger rooms, more people, laughing longer. I mean, every aspect of it is an addiction. So without the laughter, there's no show. There's no stand-up show.
Right. Now you started in the 70s, you were saying, and so
77. Yeah.
77. And so there's not a lot of stand-up comedy clubs because
no, I was doing it for a year, and a friend of mine in law school said, there are stand-up comedy clubs in New York City where guys like you, your age, are doing it. And I'm like, what? And she took me up there, and I went to a place called the Improvisation in New York City, and the Catch a Rising Star. Both sold out on a Saturday night. We got into the comic strip, which was on 2nd Avenue around 78th Street. It's still there. It's still the only one of those 3 clubs still open.
Wow.
And I saw a show, and I'm sitting there, on a Saturday night, watching the show thinking I'm funnier. Each comedy that came up, I was like that cocky kind of, I'm funnier than this guy. No, I'm funnier than this guy. And then one guy comes up, and I'm sitting there going, uh-oh, I got a lot of work to do. and it was a young Jerry Seinfeld, and I remember the bits he did that night. That's how impactful it was for me. And on the horizon, though, I knew there was a place, New York City, where there were people doing it. But there were no comedy clubs all over the country. There weren't any paying comedy clubs other than at 77, there were 2 paying comedy clubs, both of them in Southern California. The one was the Comedy Store down in, I think it originally started in Pacific Beach in San Diego and then moved over to La Jolla, where it is now. And then there was the Laugh Stop, which started in Newport Beach in 77. And then the Comedy Magic Club came along in like 78. So there were no paying comedy clubs anywhere east of the Mississippi.
So you just had to find whatever venue, because a lot of people say that in the beginning, like, anyway, where do I perform?
The thing about open mics is today, I mean, they're problematic for the comics doing it today. And that every generation has a different struggle to get to the microphone in front of an audience. But nobody was looking for stand-up comedy back then. And I was getting a lot of work when I first started opening up for rock bands. They didn't even know what I was doing when I was walking out there without a guitar in my hand. Most of the time they would introduce me just as please welcome your opening act, Ritch Shydner. They didn't say comedian or stand-up comedian. I had no credits at all. Even the places where I go find crowds before I was good enough to even get any kind of work, were singer-songwriter nights. I would jam my way into there. I would find my own gigs. I went to this guy had a pizza parlor around the corner from where I lived. And I talked him into letting me do stand-up in front of, he had like 4 tables. It was mostly takeout. He had like 4 tables, and I talked him and let me do stand-up in front of the people eating pizza in his place. And then, he's just this immigrant guy, nice guy. But he's like, I don't know what this guy's doing, standing in front of these people, harassing them while they're trying to eat their pizza. But I would go anywhere. I didn't care.
Yeah, it's a certain type of dedication and madness you have to have in order to put yourself in some of these situations. You talked about opening for rock bands. There's a story that you have that I absolutely love about opening up for a rock band. Not even a rock band, but a punk band. I was wondering if you can talk about that one.
It's sort of a first paying gig. So I'm doing places around, and I'm doing it for over a year. and I'd say 3-4 nights a week I'd go out. I was still going to law school, and I had a job that I was doing. But I'd be out 3-4 nights a week at some place. And then I was hanging out at this bar called the Child Harold on DuPont Circle in D.C. And it was a live music place. And the bartender was my friend. And he told the owner something about, because I was always in there making jokes and, causing a scene. And he said, the guy, he's doing stand-up comedy now. He's doing comedy. So the owner comes over to me. He's a famous bar owner in D.C. named Bill Hurd, wild guy. And he said, you want to open up for this band next week? I'll give you like $50. I'm like, someone's going to pay me to do this? I'm like, $50, right? And he says, yeah. And so the next week I show up, and on the marquee out front it says, from New York City, the Ramones. Now, this is 1978. I don't know anything about punk. I'm still in my kind of long hair, painter bib overalls, Jackson Brown period. And I walk in. This place is packed. Now, this is my memory. It might have been like, the place only held 100 people anyway. It might have been like 80, but it was definitely not my scene. They were all much younger guys, all guys. It seemed like all guys, leather, bare chested, the pumped up hair, safety pins through the cheek, all this stuff, and I get back to the bar, and Bill Hurd's laughing. He goes, "You're not going to make 15 minutes in front of this crowd," because you can just feel the testosterone. You can feel the anger, just like the whole crowd's like, and so I said, "Yeah, I'm going to make the 15 minutes because I want that $50." To me, it was like a rodeo event. I'm going to be on there till the buzzer goes. I didn't care. I've already been experiencing that in my little career to that point. I didn't care. He's like, you won't make 5 minutes. I'll go double or nothing. You don't make 5 minutes. I said, I'll take it. So I don't know if they introduced me. I don't know if they did. It was probably the only thing the audience heard was, "Please welcome your opening act, not the Ramones." It wasn't like I come out from behind a curtain or from backstage. It was just in the room, one of those little stages, 6-inch riser plywood. I have to walk through the crowd to get there. They are booing me. They are hissing me. That I didn't even got to the stage, man. Like they instinctively knew I was no good. I get to the stage, and I just start doing my act. I don't have any kind of improv skills at this point. I have a little 15 minutes I've cobbled together. I'm just A to B to C. I start to my act, and they're booing me, and I don't know how long I was into it. Not even a minute, maybe. And one of the guys just takes his mug of beer and shoots his beer at me, and just catches me right in the face with beer. I don't even move, man. First, I'm jammed in. The drum kit's right behind me. Amplifier. It's a tiny little stage microphone. I'm just jammed in. I just stand there holding the mic like I got hit with ocean spray in the front of the boat. Just shake it off. Anyway, my mom said, right back to my act. Yeah, no reaction other than I'm spit out some beer and go right back to my act. And the guy next to me says, "Well, he didn't move on this beer. Let's see what he does with this one." And so he hits me with a beer. And pretty soon, everybody's into the act. It's like they got real organized. It was like a deli. They were taking numbers. Everybody was. It was very. My friend said, the bartender said, it was the most schizophrenic show he'd ever seen in his life. That somebody would hit me with a beer, the whole crowd would cheer. I start talking, they'd start booing. It was just, yay, boo, yay, boo. And it didn't take long for Bill Hurd to he's like, this is not good. All the beer's flying at the stage, amplifiers there, microphones. So he's waving the money back. All right, come get your money. Come on. So I go off. I don't know I don't think I said thank you, good night. I had no sense. I just left. There was no dressing room. There was just the kitchen behind the bar. And I go back there. I'm soaked with beer, head to toe, just soaked. I get backstage. Ramones are standing there in the kitchen waiting to go on. Just like 3-4 guys, and leather and guitars and long hair. And I go back there. I'm toweling beer off. And one of the Ramones looks at me and goes, "Cool act, man." So, when the book I Killed came out, Mark Schiff and I put this book I Killed out. It was all road stories. And I put a version of that Ramones story. It's changed because a friend of mine who was there filled me in on some of the details that I'd forgotten. But so we put a version of the Ramones story in there. And a guy, a critic from Washington Post said he was a music critic back then, and he remembered no opening act for Ramones that night. He was there at the Child Harold, and he disputed my story. And so the guy who sort of tipped me off that that's why we didn't get any review in the Washington Post for our book, I sent him an email. I said, look, man, I there's a guy's phone number right here. My friend, you can call him up, man. He was there, and I did it. I'm telling you, I did it. And he said, well, I'm sorry, man, the guy won't change. And then a year later, right after the book been out for like a year, this guy contacts me and says, hey, I got to apologize to you. You know, I thought there was no opening act, and somehow this thing came up, conversation with my wife the other night. And she says, oh, no, don't you remember there was a disturbance to the front of the stage? So that would be like the title of my next tour, a disturbance at the front of the stage. If I ever did tours, it would be a disturbance at the front of the stage. That was always my favorite description of my act back then.
That's awesome. And the bartenders must have been happy because you got a free round, an extra round of drinks for everyone to buy.
They were selling beer that night.
Yeah, absolutely. So was that your worst show ever? I don't know if you can top that.
Listen, back then, I mean, this happened around the same time. You know, they were just going everywhere to go perform. And my friend, the guy Howard Vine, who took me up, he sort of became my sort of like, you know, unofficial agent, so to speak. He would just find places for me to perform. So one night he says, hey, there's a place called the Gay Cabaret down in Southwest Washington, and they have a talent night. And so you can go in there and perform that once a week. They do a talent night, Tuesday, Wednesday, whatever it was. I said, all right, let's go. Now we're clueless, man. This is 1977, whatever it was. We think gay means like Gay Cabaret, means like the gay 90s, you know, or the Flintstones gay old time. We're not right. Really catching it. Nobody was out of the closet in 1977. The closet was packed. You know what I'm saying? It was right. They were only forced out by overcrowding. And so we get there and it's a gay nightclub. But the guy was really nice. He said, look, fellas, you know, we'd welcome you normally. We'd welcome you to come perform anything anybody wants to do is okay. But tonight, once a month, we do ladies' night. Now, again, we're so clueless. We go, ladies' night? That's fantastic. We'll be the only guys there. We're going to do great, man. We don't realize what's happening. We're two idiots. I go on stage. He's all right, man. He put me on. It's lesbians. It's a bunch. It's packed with lesbians, and I'm like the last thing they want to see. I go up there and I'm doing my knucklehead 15 minutes of memorized stupidity, and they're just staring at me. And at one point early on, I just blurted out something. I guess I'm your worst nightmare, and they laughed. Now, you know, with a little experience, if you understand what's going on, take that laugh as and thank you. Good night. Right? Yep. Accidental or not. And I'm not going to get another laugh, but I don't know. I'm clueless. I just go, oh, they must want me to do more. You know, I'm just. So I start doing my act again, right back to my dad said, right back to my little act. And this woman in the front stands up. She walks up on the stage, takes me by the elbow, and just leads me off. It was just leads me out of the room and shuts the door behind me. It was a total mercy killing. It was not a word was said. I didn't hear any applause when the door shut. They just went back to their show and removed the nuisance.
That's hysterical.
Now I got a lot of bombings and horror stories, private shows at houses and parties, and you know, there's all sorts of crazy stuff that I did. Anything to get try to do my comedy in front of strangers. That was it. If there was a group of strangers gathered, I would do it.
So how do you, when you have experiences like that, just getting beer bath after beer bath, or walked off the stage, you know, and booed off and all of that sort of stuff, how do you mentally cope with that?
Because in between that, I was getting laughs, and I started noticing things like say there were a lot of these singer-songwriter nights in Washington D.C. in the late 70s, especially. You know, everybody was trying to be a Jackson Browne or James Taylor or Bonnie Raitt or you know, Joni Mitchell, whatever. And so I'd go to these things and I'd sign up. When I first started doing it, they were all musicians. I'd be the only comic on stage. In fact, the only other guy I ran across back then was Lewis Black. You know, Lewis Black. He was also in Washington D.C. and I ran across him at almost every bar had a singer-songwriter night. Every bar, every pub in Washington D.C. So I'd see him once in a while at places, and that's the only other guy that I met that was doing it like that. And I noticed, you know, I started getting on at more and more of these places. Then say I was doing so many, or I had to work one night, or I had to study for something one night and I didn't show up. I'd come back the next week and they'd all the musicians be like, "Hey, where were you, man? We missed you, man. Where were you?" I go, I'm starting to get something. I'm starting to get some laughs, steady laughs. I'm starting to, it's all about R&R. I used to call it reputation and repetition. And that's what I called it, R&R. I just got to get a reputation by repeating myself all the time and going on these places all the time. And that's what was happening. So in between those horror shows, there were a lot of good shows, or at least getting better. And I was trying new jokes all the time. And, the percentages, whatever it is. But there's nothing that I enjoy more than the smell of a new joke, that new joke smell. That's the best.
Yeah, it's one of the things I've always found too is, people go, how do you deal with all the bombing or whatever? And you just need that one show where you go, yep. And that'll make up for the 99 horrible shows before it.
And there's only one way to get a bad show out of your mouth is a new one, a good one. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the beauty of, like, say, when I was living in New York City back in I moved there in '79. There were three really good showcase clubs. I said Catch, Comic Strip, and the Improv, and then there were a bunch of other little rooms and paying gigs in Jersey and Long Island, and so if you had a bad one, you'd run across town to another room and get on stage in front of people. You could easily make it up.
Yeah, the retribution set, as I call it.
Retribution set. I like that.
So how long did it take for things to start to really click for you? How much were you getting up, a week and about that time, how much time did it take for it to start?
Well, I decided to forego the law career and go full on comedy in '79. And then I was really doing it all the time. My friend Joe Mullen, who was a guy who we swapped apartments. I took his New York apartment. He took my DC apartment. And he said, he saw me when I first started. He was a friend of mine from high school and a musician. And he said, I saw the struggles, and he was there a lot of times. He said, I came back like after 6 months in New York. He said, oh my God, he's got it. Wow. He said, you were funny like you were funny in high school. You have to knock away a lot of the stuff. I'd knock away a lot of my self-consciousness. I'd knock away influences from other comics. At least when I first started out, I was, my favorite comics were Robert Klein and Richard Pryor and George Carlin. And, I sounded like a Jewish black hippie up there. Sometimes I was a little confused. I had like Art Carney mannerisms. And so whenever you find yourself doing something, you kind of drop it, like, don't do that. That's a Robert Klein move, or that's a Carlin kind of take, and so you start knocking away all the influences, start stripping down because everybody just needs to get back to who they were when they first realized they were funny, and what they were doing when they were younger. Really basic is all you're doing. The same attitude, the same sort of performance thing, just a hyper version of that, I think.
Yeah. So when you're starting out, I always love this question. What's the best piece of advice you got? But you were also starting out in a time when, it's kind of the Wild West of comedy. It wasn't like now if someone starts out, you have someone like you that someone can go to and go, hey, do you have any advice? So did you have any?
My advice is get on stage every chance you get all the time. The only way to get better is stage time. We talked about that. You can't get better any other way. So, I was always going on stage, like say, and I've noticed this was happening, what happened. And I knew it then. I'd go do a Jersey gig. We'd leave the Improv in New York City, go out to do a Jersey gig. We paid $55, a lot of money to us then. My rent was only $110 a month in New York at that time. So $55 was a lot of money. And we'd come back. Now, we come back to the Improv bar. We'd leave from that bar. The guys would pick us up, take us out, come back. 3 comics. We come back in the bar. The other 2 comics go to the bar and they sit down. They're done for the night. They got $55 in their pocket. They're going to get free beers at the Improv. They're done. I go right up to the manager. All right, who's next? Who's on next? Can I get on? When can I get on? Yeah, and then I'm calling across town. Who's on? Can I get on if I come over to the Strip? Can I get on if I come over to Catch? I want 2 more sets, 3 more sets that night. I'm not satisfied with the one Jersey gig that we did. It didn't matter how satisfying it was. I always wanted more because I knew it that better. And then I'm going to try new jokes every time. Every time you come on. If it's not a paid gig, a highly paid gig, or it's not an audition, you should be trying new jokes. If you're not trying something new, you're wasting your time up there just doing the same old stuff for no money. That's ridiculous.
But on a paid show, you want to give them your ace, you know.
You got to give them their money. You may slip in a new one then in a paid show, and that's going to trip you up in the middle. But I'm just saying, when I'm doing it, I'm always doing new material, and it paid off for me, because when that Wild West opened up in 1980, when the clubs started popping, they were popping, man. They were popping, bam, 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 all over the country, and comics came out the headline. Some of those comics, you could get away with being a 20-minute act in the city. You could do that today in LA or New York. You could just do the same 20 over and over and over. I guess maybe you could back then, but I came out with a ton of material. I was constantly building that act. I learned that from Seinfeld when I first started watching guys like Larry and Miller, who's constantly doing new material. They were inspiring me. And it's like, you got to build that act. You got to build it up. So when those clubs open, Pittsburgh and Cleveland and all these places, we're going out to Detroit, going to south to Atlanta. When all these clubs started opening, I was a headliner. They knew they could throw me up there, and I'm going to give them that hour. And then back then, this is before, again, the Mothers Against Drunk Driving changed the drunk driving ethos. Well done, by the way, back in the 80s. But before that, in the early 80s, it was like the club owners were selling as many drinks as they could to these people. So they had packed audiences. It was hot. The place was packed. It was like, who can sell the most drinks? So they'd let you go long. 2-hour, 3-hour shows were the norm. No show ended less than 2 hours that I can remember. And comics were trying to see how long they could go. I'd go in the club and go, who's got the record here? They go, oh, Glenn Hirsch, 1 hour and 45. I go, I'm breaking that tonight. You could tell everybody, it's just, don't anybody think they're getting home early tonight.
Wow.
That was the way it was.
Wow. It's such a different scene than it is now, especially now everything's like 90 minutes and out.
Look, I was in the clubs by the late 80s. Everything had changed. It was like they're dropping the check. You had the check spot. There was no really worry about the check spot back when I first started, but then the check spot became a problem because your headliner's up there and 30 minutes into your act, they're dropping the checks, and you got to kind of tread water while they're paying their bills, and then try to close strong for that last 15. But they don't want you off on stage more than an hour headlining. Yeah, ideally 45 minutes. That changed.
Well, so you talk about having a lot of material and writing and constantly working the material. What is your writing process like for stand-up?
Well, I think a lot of comics I knew back then, we were always taking notes. You had notes. But I found that you couldn't really. Sometimes a joke landed on its feet, set up, punchline, worded perfectly. That's rare. Normally, you come up with a concept. You're looking for the punchline to it. You might have a punchline. You got to work the setup correctly. The transition from the page to the stage is everything for the joke. What looks good on the page might not work on the stage. And since this is a performance art we're doing, you needed to work on the stage. It doesn't matter how good it looks written. That's why I laugh. People go like Facebook. You just go, okay, well that's a pun or whatever it is. It'll work okay on Facebook, get you a bunch of likes. But is it going to snap that whip on stage, man? Is it going to make those people go, oh, and more with laughter live? So they got to work. You got to massage it, get it timed up perfectly. That's the timing. That timing has to be worked out in front of a live audience. The only way to do it. So I wrote every day, worked every day. I learned that, again, I keep mentioning his name, but he was the model for me in terms of a lot of the work ethic and the craftsmanship. As Jerry Seinfeld said, you write every day. And I found it to be true. I wrote every day. And at night, I might not have the punchline in daytime, but I had worked on it. I'd focused on the material. So when I went on stage at night, I'm trying to set up that I saw that day on the page and thinking about it. I'm trying to set up, and in my mind, the ego or whatever provides the punchline live that night, and it works, and then it locks in. That's the way I got to do this. Now the next night I got to do this kind of the same way. You trick them how you're coming about it, but you are kind of locked in on a set up punchline once you sort of set it.
Well, and then the nice thing too is if you're getting 2-3 sets in a night, you're able to tweak and adjust and edit and try to get that in. So by the end of the night, what didn't work in the first show is you got it dialed in, by the end. And if you repeat that,
we're doing 10 shows a week in these clubs. So that means I'm on stage 10 hours, at least 10 hours, 15 hours, sometimes more, a week.
Wow.
Right in front of the crowds, and it's not a beat up audience. It's I got a 15-minute act and a 20-minute act or 25-minute act, and I'm on. It's like there's no better way to work out your material in front of an audience like that, and you have all the time you need to do it.
Wow. How much material would you say you have or had throughout your career? Could you even roughly put a number on that?
I can roughly put a number because I have tapes, and I did 8 shows taped in San Diego Improv, Mark Anderson's place, back in '91. And out of that, I got 4 90-minute tapes of material I thought was good enough for people to hear. So whatever that is, 6 hours of material, about 6 hours of material in 91. That's about what I had.
Wow.
And again, I cleaned my notebook. I mean, I cleaned out all the old stuff that I hadn't been doing for a while. You know how it is. You bring in something, and all of a sudden you find, I'm no longer doing that joke anymore. Why? Because I outgrew it, or it no longer felt like it fit me, or whatever the reason. I just got bored with it. Or too many other comics started doing that material. That subject became played out by everybody. But at that time, when that week in San Diego, I have the tape still, and I have the material. I mean, it's like 6 hours of stuff that I got that was workable. I had 8 shows that week, or 9 shows, or whatever. But I narrowed it down. I still have the master tapes, but narrowed it down to like 6 hours on 4 90-minute cassette tapes.
That's
I know, right? It was maniacal. Mark was hilarious. We were like, every day he was with me working on it. Mark Anderson, every day we were going over the material, working on it, figure out what to do that night. Every night, okay, well, that one didn't go so good last night. That joke, I'm going to bring that one back tonight, but the other stuff is okay. I'm going to move on. That was a crazy week.
Wow, that's just insane. I mean, to have it all and to do it within 1 week is just terrifying thought to me.
Guy named Walt Murray had recorded it. He was like it was supposed to be a record company, but I think the record company folded and I just ended up for the whole tape.
That's funny. So kind of switching back, just looking through your experience, what is some of the biggest mistakes you see new comics making? Or just comics in general? Don't have to be.
Well, I think the 2 things we just talked about is being lazy. It seems like the job is just working an hour a night, but that's just the show part of it. And getting ready for that show mentally, physically, getting ready for that hour, not giving yourself that prep, not writing new material. Those would be the biggest. Not going on stage enough, thinking that you're going to be okay 3-4 nights a week, with 5 minutes or 10 minutes at an open mic. That's not going to get you anywhere. But a lot of people today, again, this is different. There were no amateurs. There were no hobbyists in our day. They couldn't get stage time in any of the clubs or any place. So you have a lot of hobbyists today. You have people who never intend to quit their day job. It used to be a heckle, somebody to yell at the comedian, "Don't quit your day job." And now you yell that to a comic today, he's likely to go, "I don't intend to. I got a good 401 and medical and dental. So there's no reason I'm quitting my day job. This is just for kicks." You have that. So, but if this is your thing and you burn with that fire to do it, I think those are the 2 areas that that I see people making the most mistakes. Otherwise, there are no rules. If it's funny and it gets a laugh, it's funny.
So you have been a part of some really big franchises within just TV and movies. How did things like Roxanne and Married with Children come to you?
Because you're out there doing it, again, doing those Tonight shows. I did a bunch of Tonight shows, Letterman, HBO special. Somebody once said, I just need a break. And I forget who it was. There was just a bunch of comics around. Somebody said, you need 8 breaks. You need about 8 breaks. And it's really totality. And there's very few overnight sensations. Stephen Wright, back in my day, he did like one Tonight show in 1983 or something. Boom, he was gone. But that's a stupendous talent. That's a generational he's a freak, man. I mean, he was so good,
Mm.
and what he was doing was so different. It just stood out. I mean, there was no denying it. But the rest of us, you know, the blue collar, lunch pail type of comics, you just got to make lots and lots of appearances, and people notice you. You know, Tommy Smothers saw me on a Tonight Show, and they were going to do a replacement show, and the Smothers brothers, and he called me up and said, I want you to write for our show. So I get my first paid writing gig for TV, you know, and gets me into the Writers Guild. And Steve Martin, I think, saw a lot of comics doing Tonight Shows and other shows, and he hired us all to be in his movie Roxanne. And so Eddie, and again, Friends, it's a big thing. You know, the Friends, I probably got more work from Friends. I got a writing job writing on Mind and a Married Man because of a friend, Mike Binder, who was a stand-up comic when I first got to LA. I met him, became friends with him, and then he became a director and a big writer and a director. And so, you know, there you get jobs. Roseanne gave me my writing job at Roseanne on her show, you know, because we worked together. So your friends, Eddie Murphy, you know, I knew him when we first started in New York, and so he put me in to Beverly Hills Cop 2. Your friends that you come up with give you so much work. I mean, it's really important. Those relationships are really important.
Wow. Yeah, there's so many different topics I can talk to you about. I kind of want to just kind of branch out a little bit. So what is the difference, would you say, between writing for a TV show versus doing stand-up? And then also, I guess we could talk about, I know that you have written for some comedians. You've written, helped work on specials and that sort of thing. What is the kind of the difference, would you say, with those?
Well, the TV show Sitcoms is a whole nother script thing. First of all, as a stand-up, you're everything. You're the writer, the star, the editor, the producer, the director, the costumer. You're everything. You make every decision. It's all you. You don't have to consult with anybody if you want to. It's good to have a manager or some boyfriend, girlfriend, somebody, friends that give you advice. But I mean, you're in control of the whole thing. And most stand-up comics, one of the reasons why we do this is because of that. We love that control. Then you go into sitcom writing. You know, I got that when I worked with Roseanne, when my first real job writing, and you learn immediately. You know, you're part of the machine. In fact, when you first start, you're a very small and easily replaced part of the machine. And so, you know, you have to just kind of get a whole nother mindset. You know, and you're writing for, again, characters on a show. So there used to be a comic, a great guy. And we were writing on Roseanne, and he'd go, "That's funny." His name was Dave Tyree, very funny guy. And somebody would go, "Well, it's not really funny for that character." No, I'm telling you, it's funny. It's funny for you and your stand-up. Doesn't mean it's funny for that character. It's a hard transition. We all have to make that, and so that's a big difference right there. Is writing, and it's a sort of similar thing to writing for other stand-ups. And I've written for Roseanne. I was obviously a woman, so I had to get, you know, try to do the best I can with that. But sometimes it's easy to write for. If I write for Jeff Foxworthy or Jay Leno or somebody who's more, you know, in line with my comedic outlook or whatever it is, it's easy to write for him, Ron White or whoever. It's different. So you just have to kind of, and they have to take what you say. You know, and Jeff Foxworthy will say, he would laugh. He go, he had to take what I say, like, that Jersey gruff thing that I do, and put it into, hey, folks. He put it into his southern drawl, and his attitude is a little different too. So he had to convert it. They all have to convert it to the way they do their. You can do the best you can to give them something that's kind of funny and you think is a good idea or joke or whatever, and then they have to edit and transfigure the thing into their language,
right,
and their style. But you know, it's all. I tell you, I get a kick out of, you hear somebody do a joke that you've written. It's not as much fun as doing a joke yourself, but it's pretty close. Sometimes it's really a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's I've written for a few comedians too, and then when you see it work, you're just like, this is, again, it's not as good as but sometimes, you know, for yourself, but it's like you said, it's right up there. And I always found it was just the hardest part is finding their voice. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Finding your voice. Yeah.
So that's I mean that's really good advice for people. But how does the on a higher level, writing for like a Foxworthy, how does that kind of work? Sometimes there's NDAs or non-disclosure agreements. Sometimes there's
I have some of those.
legal scenarios.
I have some of those. But Jeff put me on with two gold albums that I wrote for him, and he gave me gold records, and they put me on the, written by Jeff Foxworthy and Ritch Shydner. He's very generous, very generous. The pay is all sliding scales. I don't have there are guys who can pay big money. You charge them big money because they're going to. My thing is if you're writing say an hour or whatever, they're going to make the money they pay you back in one night, one show. That's how much money these guys can make. So then they got that material for the next year or two until either they cut the special or they get bored of the material. It just depends. I wrote for singers, patter for singers, and some were like, wow, the money was ridiculous how much they were giving me. And Kenny Rogers, I don't think he ever even tried one of the jokes. He would have me perform them backstage at Las Vegas. He's having his pre-show meal, and afterwards I do all this material and that I'd come out with once a week, and he'd laugh. That's good. Then he'd go out and do the same stuff he's done 100 years. And I'm getting big checks. I'm like, this is fantastic. I don't care.
That's great. So do you have any additional tips for aspiring comedic writers, maybe for sitcom or, other comedic?
And look, this is also, again, finding if you can get hooked up with somebody who are a talent, and you got great ideas and they need a great idea. Now they've got some heat. If they need an idea for a sitcom or a movie or something, and you can, I think you just got to keep writing all sorts of things. You're writing sitcoms, movie scripts, obviously podcast ideas and stories and jokes. You're writing all the time. If you're going to be a writer, you have to approach that the way the stand-up is, be on stage every night. You've got to come up with a lot of material and so go out there and hang out at these clubs and befriend these comics. And here's a joke that might work for you. Oh, really? Give them a joke. It's like a tease, right? Here's a joke. They're going to come back. That works. Hey, what else you got? Yeah. What else you got? Then you become friends, because comics need writers. Every comic does. Anybody tells you the big deceit now in stand-up comedy is that there are no writers for comics. And everybody knows if you're a popular comic, you can't write all that material yourself. You can't come up with it all yourself. You need help. But nobody wants to admit that anymore like they did 40, 50 years ago, because the vogue is everything the comic says comes out of their mind. That's how it is now. And it's supposed to be conversational and it's personal to the comic. So nobody wants to admit that somebody else wrote a piece or whatever. But, they're needed. If you just want to be a writer, not say just, I don't mean that, because obviously someone like Judd Apatow became a great writer for other comics and then sketches and then shows and then movies, and he's a great director. So I'm just saying, if that's what you want to do, is be a writer more than a performer, you still got to go out and meet the performers, because you need to make those relationships.
Yeah, it seems like there's, like you mentioned, there's this stigma of having people write for you, that you lose you lose credit because you didn't come up with it yourself.
Yeah, that really started the Lenny Bruce and Mort Saul era back in the late 50s, early 60s. That's the era that changed that. Before that, everybody bragged about how many writers they had, and so they changed that because it has to be conversational, and the game is that it looks like the comic's just thinking of it, the top of the head, sort of like, just thought of this idea, In fact, the vogue right now almost is like a non-performance style. Like I went out to get laughs. Our generation, you went out and it was obvious we were performing to get laughs. But some comics today want to act like, they just sort of like wandered out on the stage. What is that, chair? I'll sit down. I'll talk to you a while. They just kind of like, it's accidental performance,
It's it's such an interesting mindset, because I'm always just mine is just like a step on their throat mentality with jokes. Just hit them with joke. And then you see people who are like, I want to just sit back and tell my story. And
Yeah. You want to act
And
like it's just, I'll be here telling this thing, or I'll be over at the bar, or I'll be out in the car. Just kind of, we got a microphone there. Yeah, I guess I could talk into that.
well, and it's interesting because you're a great person to talk to about this because one, you've lived through so much of the modern era of stand-up comedy, but you also have studied the history of stand-up comedy. In fact, you put together a show, and we're traveling around the country
Sure.
talking about the history of comedy before the pandemic hit. How did that kind of get into your atmosphere sphere or whatever?
Well, I was always, ever for years, I was interested in it. Phyllis Diller, who was a great comic and the first female star stand-up. I became friends with her, and we would talk about the history of it. And she was always pushing me to write a book, and I wasn't sure who would, nobody seemed to be. I did some book proposals. Nobody seemed to be interested in a book about the history of stand-up comedy. So I just started doing these stories, and I found a through line. What stand-ups say, what it says about America, society at any particular time. We're the most reflective art form. In real time, you can see the zeitgeist of America through stand-up comedy. The fears, the obsessions, everything is right there in stand-up comedy. And so I started looking at it that way, what the comics said and what it said about America, and that became the show. And I enjoyed doing it. And it's funny. It's really funny. I get to tell the jokes. I found jokes like from the first stand-up comic to whoever you want, Steve Martin, whoever. I found jokes that would work today, audiences today laugh at, and stories which are really funny stories. So it's been a real thrill. I love doing it. I'm going to do it again once this thing lifts.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess without giving away too much, who did you find out was the first? Who and when was the first stand-up comic? Just
Well,
so
it's
they have
really
frame of reference.
the guy's name was Artemus Ward. Artemus Ward, and I found him I thought Mark Twain was the first stand-up because I know he did these really funny lectures and after dinner speaking engagements where he just made the audience laugh. That's all he's up there to do, make them laugh. That's what it is. It's one person going on stage with the sole purpose of making the audience laugh. That's it.
Wow.
And he wrote about the funniest guy he ever saw was this Artemus Ward, and he started doing it in the Civil War. He started in 1861.
Wow.
And he was doing a parody of these lectures that were all over the country at the time, sort of like television or movies of the era. These lectures were always, educational, either a moral lesson or a flat out educational lesson. Here's the new continent of Africa. I'm going to talk about that. Or I'm going to talk about how drinking is bad or slavery is bad. And he decided to go on stage and just sort of almost parody these lectures. He wouldn't talk. He'd set a subject like 60 Minutes in Africa was one of the. He'd always have these titles he put on his shows, but he'd never refer to Africa or anything until the very end. And he'd say something like, after doing like an hour and a half, he's up there. He said, "I'm going to try to make them laugh as hard as they can for as long as they can." That was his whole purpose. That's every stand-up comedy since, right?
Yeah.
And he'd talk for like an hour and a half, and then at the end he'd go, "Oh yeah, I haven't said anything about Africa." Well, let me tell you, Africa is a long way away. So if you're going to go early so you have time to get back for work. He was absurd stuff, and then he'd end it. But he was a funny guy, and he became a big star. He died early. He was only 32 years old. He was friends with Lincoln. He befriended Mark Twain. He was a big star and completely lost to history. But I love the guy. I mean, he was a wild guy. He was what they called back then a lotus eater, which meant he liked his weed and hashish, and he was but he died of tuberculosis. They didn't even know. I don't even know if they called it then or not, or maybe just started calling it when he died in 1867. But he was a lunger. They used to call him consumption. That's what killed him.
It's interesting because I think if you were to ask most people, even stand-ups, when was the first stand-up comedy, most people would probably go Lenny Bruce when the first, and you sit there and you pull out, Artemis in 1861, and you're like, whoa, that's
look, it was a different thing. Obviously there was no electronic amplification, there were no electric spotlights, but it was working and people loved it, and the lecture series circuit sort of died out, and then it was just saloons, and saloons were a terrible place. Stand-up comics didn't do well in saloons. entertainment and saloons. And these saloons back then were just all men and women who were working the men, so to speak. So they were pretty much open air brothels, and so that most of were teams, comedy teams. Sort of term slapstick came from each other. They would just stand on stage mostly and just beat on each other with sticks and bats, so that the audience wouldn't do it. They would just preemptive strike on each other. They did a lot of slapstick, and then vaudeville came and comics started coming on a lot more, and it became a more settled audience mostly, and then vaudeville started. Then of course all these things came along: electronic amplification, the microphone, and but yeah, that's the modern era. When you start at the beginning, Lenny Bruce and Mort Saul and those guys, they changed it from sort of like generic comics, just your mother-in-law jokes are the same as my mother-in-law jokes, and my wife's a bad driver, bad cook, the same as your wife's a bad driver, bad cook, to like it became personal. It became an art form. They made it an art form. What the comic said mattered to him and to the audience, and they changed it back then. So that's the beginning to me of the modern era. Sure.
What I got a chance to see your history of stand-up comedy show, and it was amazing, and I thoroughly loved it. One of my favorite tidbits about that just made me kind of just blew my mind, no pun intended, was where the term working blue comes from. And for people who don't know, that means that you curse or you're dirty, as opposed to clean comedy. Can you just tell us about where that term?
So in vaudeville, you had to work very clean in vaudeville. That they wanted to get the families in, and so children and women were there along the men, and you couldn't say slob, you couldn't say son of a gun. You had to work clean. So if you did something, some joke where you tried to get away with an innuendo or whatever, they would put that material typewritten in a blue envelope and put that in your dressing room, and you better not do that material again. So that was called blue material. They got the color blue actually from England. In England, the Queen's Exchequer, who was the censor, royal censor, who censored every play, every performance done on stage in England, had to go through this censor, would strike out any objectionable material with blue pencil. So it might have been called blue material in England before it was actually called blue material in America, but it sort of just, they took the same color scheme in vaudeville and it became blue material.
Wow. Yeah, that's such a cool story with that.
You're working blue, you're working dirty.
Yeah. And you have so many of them. You ended up writing, you did the I Killed book, which was the compilation of road stories, which is a fantastic read. You also were featured in the documentary I Am Comic, which kind of chronicled your coming back into comedy after a break. Yeah. And then you also have I feel like a talk show host. You also have Kicking Through the Ashes. It is my life as a stand-up in the 80s comedy boom. And what I love about this, in addition to the book is fantastic, I will try to show it, but on the cover, you have several flyers with your name just absolutely butchered.
Yeah,
we got Ritch.
The whole cover. That's all the cover is all my name butchered in a million different ways. I should have had a different name from the beginning. My name's actually spelled Shidner. I thought if I just changed the I to a Y, people could pronounce it. They would always give me Shydner when I was growing up instead of Shydner. I should have changed my name. I had names when I first started. I went with Elvis de Groot was one of the names I went with, and then I went with. I also went with Bud Lunch. Bud Lunch was one of the names. I should have gone any other. I could, if I just went Richie Allen, just took my first two names, but I don't know why I stuck with that name.
My favorite is Ritch Shydner. That's a good
Shydner. That was Toronto, yeah.
So
my favorite on there is they put my name misspelled with Shirley Hempel's picture, and Shirley Hempel, for anybody knows, is a very funny black female comedian of the 80s. Oh, yeah. And so this week was Shirley Hempel. Yeah, there it is down there. It is. Shirley Hempel's picture with Ritch Shydner over here. Yeah.
That's hysterical. So tell us a little bit about that book. Is it still available?
It's available on Amazon. It's available on Amazon, and I got a lot of more stories that I didn't put in there, and maybe one day I'll kind of just do a second book. I don't know.
You should definitely,
there's a lot of great stories in there. A lot of great stories, road stories, and stories about. And I put chapters in about different comics. Of course, Bill Hicks or my friend Mike McDonald from Canada, who was Jay Leno, Robin Williams, Sam Kinison. All different chapters about these comics who were either friends of mine or also very influential comics from that era.
I guess one of the last questions, we'll be wrapping up shortly, is what is it that you love about comedy that just keeps you coming back after all this time?
It's that mystery. You don't know how it's going to go when you get up there. It's something, anything could happen and you don't know. I mean, once I was on stage one time and a car just bashed into the side of the building. The whole thing shook. One time I was on stage and I've got caps, and my front tooth up here just flew out of my mouth, and I caught it in midair, and then I did 10 minutes on a tooth flying out of my mouth, and the guy on front of the audience is like, look, and he pulls his bridge, his teeth out. And where the whole audience is pulling teeth out of their mouth. I didn't go on stage thinking this is going to happen. But it was comedy in that moment, and you never know what's going to happen. And it's that's the fun of it, man. It's a live show, and I'm always open for that. I can blast the material like any comic, I think, but I'm always looking for those moments which are not being able to replicate.
How do you handle that? How do you handle like an improv moment?
You just go with you. What I learned early on, and I used to love doing it, I opened up for rock band, so I had to be quick, and a lot of it was combative. But say the first thing that comes to your head. Don't censor yourself. I think that's what part of Robin Williams' genius was. I mean, he just didn't filter it, let it go. Now, sometimes that led to him doing other people's lines, but he was a very funny guy in his own right, and his mind just was quick, and he was not holding it back, man. He just threw those reins up and said, go. And that's what you got to do with improv. You got to be the first thing in your mind. The quickest, fastest is funniest.
Absolutely.
He who hesitates is lost.
Yep. Absolutely.
I mean, how many times you walked away from a conversation and went, "Oh, I should have said that." Right?
Mm-hmm.
Everybody has that. Well,
absolutely.
You can't do that in improv. Improv, you got to be right. Whatever it is, just go with it. That's those social constructs, man.
Such good advice. And then I get one other question came up, and I always wonder this, because you were talking about, there's different types of comedians, and there's some backlash where some comics will do stuff just to kind of make people laugh and take away their issue, more corporate or church. And then some people will go with the social commentary as opposed to I'm just trying to give you an escape. Do you have any opinion on that? Just whatever works for you.
Whatever works, man. I mean, I'm there to entertain that audience. You may entertain them differently than I can. Sometimes you have a private party. You got to really know who your audience is if that's what you're there for. But other than that, it's up to you. And I've seen comics, different comics, completely different comics, able to take an audience one way, and then 180 degrees, the next comic takes them completely the other direction, and then the next comic after that goes way back the other way. Comedy audiences sometimes are kind of stiff, and maybe they can't they get to a flow and they don't. It's hard to go back. But some audiences that I've seen, they're very malleable, and they'll go with you. You go with it, but you're always working within a parameter of what their values are. They as Rodney Dangerfield just used to say, individually they may be orangutans, but as a group they're genius. I mean, they're right. They're right. If it's funny, they're laughing. If it's not funny, they're not laughing.
Yeah. Well, I want to just get into this. Ritch, normally at this point we talk about a charity or a foundation or an organization, and Ritch was very gracious enough to donate his time to me so I can promote an organization that I love, and that is the Facial Paralysis and Bell's Palsy Foundation. They're at facialparalysisfoundation.org. And obviously, with my history of facial paralysis, this organization has really meant a lot to me. And they put out a lot of research, and They do a lot of support groups online. They do in person. They do research and funding for people, and to just give a little bit of support for when people are going through facial paralysis and feeling alone. So I want to give them a quick shout out to Facial Paralysis and Bell's Palsy Foundation. Again, if you need any support, facialparalysisfoundation.org. And one more time, if you want to check out Ritch Shydner, his website is www.Shydner, SHYDNER.com. And Rich, I can't thank you. And I could talk to you for hours about
we'll
comedy.
do it another time, Brian. We'll do it another time.
All right. Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you, man.
Thank you for everyone watching and tuning in. And we'll talk to you soon.